Welcome again, everyone. It's Brian Burke here from Thrive Now, and we are talking about listening to thrive. We've been doing a course on listening to thrive, and today we're going to consider what it looks like and what it means to be generous listeners. So, generous listening is the idea of basically what is it like to speak to you? What are you like as a listener? What is if you could say, the feeling and the atmosphere that we generate? Is it easy or hard to speak to you as a listener? So I'm proposing that we all have the opportunity to grow in our ability to become generous listeners. As such a wonderful idea. It is something that, if you could say, doesn't necessarily cost us too much, but it brings so many benefits to our life, to our relationships, to our workplaces, to our community, to develop in our appreciation and our demonstration of being generous listeners. And it's wonderful thought. Now, I've got some things written down. I'll probably refer to them a little bit more today because I want to make some statements about being generous listening, because I believe it can be powerful statements that can just help provoke thought and reflection on what is generous listening as well. So let's start here with some thoughts there. Generous listener looks for opportunity to encourage other people, which is a wonderful thing. Now, we might not consider that very much, but I'm really going to implore to you that encouraging other people is such a wonderful trait, such a wonderful habit, behavior to extend in ourselves, because our lives are so full of moments of discouragement. And being listeners that think, hey, what chance, what opportunity can I have to bring encouragement, is a fantastic step to take in life that we live. Okay, so generous listeners as well listen with a sense of value, not just to the information that they receive, but to the one who's giving it. See, generous listeners value not only the details that they're receiving, but generous listeners value the person that's giving those details. And that's a really great thing, to value the person that's giving the details. Now, yep, certainly there's parts of us that go, but if we're really real with ourselves, sometimes we don't value the person that's giving the details as much. And even if they're strangers, I want to provoke something in us to say, why can't we value even some of the strangers that are giving us these details? Just a thought. Okay, so the next one here is that generous listeners look for unity and not division. They look for unity in conversation and not division. They look for what can bring us together instead of what can pull us apart. Generous listeners look for wholeness instead of brokenness. They look for a pathway to wholeness instead of brokenness. They might acknowledge brokenness, but they also look for wholeness. There's a sense of bringing together, of healing, that generous listeners will look for. Generous listeners will look to heal and not to hurt. So a generous listener will seek healing and not hurt. They will consider their responses. Are their responses going to promote healing, or are their responses going to promote hurt with things? Okay. Generous listeners will seek to understand and not accuse. They'll seek to understand and not accuse. So therefore, generous listeners will at times pause and not respond immediately, because they'll be seeking to understand instead of just accusing. All right. Generous listeners as well. They will seek to acknowledge instead of to aggravate. They'll seek there to have an acknowledgement instead of an attacking. They will not immediately move into attack posture when something seems, say, against what they were initially wanting and desiring, but they will rather come into a space of acknowledging. It doesn't mean that they force themselves to have to agree with something that they don't agree with, but they will certainly want to enter a space of acknowledging, of wanting to understand more where that other person is coming from. So they'll acknowledge that position. They'll acknowledge more of an awareness of where they're coming from instead of attacking where the speaker is coming from. It's a difference in how we listen. Instead of stepping into attack posture, we step into acknowledgement. Okay, what are some other thoughts about that? I think I have, I'll just go back again, that a generous listener cares about the well-being of the one who's speaking. It's just a posture of care. There's a sense of valuing the wellness of the person who's speaking. Generous listener is engaged in conversations. They will seek to demonstrate an interest. They'll seek to demonstrate that they are active in that conversation, that they have pleasure in that conversation, that they're not just there because they have to, but they want to be present. And it really does make a difference in our lives there. A generous listener also will seek to explore the conversation further. Remember, we've been talking about the story? See, a generous listener will want to explore that story further, which is a great thing. A generous listener appreciates others' concerns as well. So it'll take time to appreciate others' concerns. It will acknowledge that there's concerns. And a generous listener as well helps people to thrive, because a generous listener brings out the best in other people. This is the core statement I'd like to wrap up on. A generous listener seeks to bring their best to a conversation, to listening, so they can help draw out the best in the person who's speaking to them. Generous listener understands and knows that if they give their best to the person who's speaking to them, then they help to tap into and draw out the best of the person who's speaking to them. Now that is generous listening. Thank you. Catch you later. Bye-bye.